Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by my speculative, sensual co-host Tucker Hazeln. We're here today to talk about, among other things, the future of Nintendo, as we usually do. But
Yeah.
if you want to speculate, postulate,
Ooh.
pontificate with us, you should
Whoa.
join our Discord. Link as usual, somewhere in the description. Well, down
Somewhere?
there.
I mean, it doesn't really move.
That's true, but sometimes if I'm editing the video, I do a little bit of a paragraph.
Oh.
I do a little bit of we engage in a bit of keyword stuffing.
Yeah, a
Don't
little
tell the
SEO.
CEO. Don't tell the CEO of YouTube. Um, but I mean, if you have to tell her anything, I'd like you to tell Susan to like this video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and leave a
Yeah.
comment. Um, those are kind of your mandates,
Sure.
I would
Yeah.
say. Your
It's like
mandates for
what is
today.
what four theses, something like that. There's one that somebody did like a bunch more theses, but we're paring it down a little bit.
Yeah, he did his for a
Efficiency.
very different reason than we're doing ours, but that's
No, but
fine. That's
ours is
neither
more
here nor
important,
there.
frankly.
I would say that speaking from a contemporary mindset to our audience, what we're doing here is probably more important than what Martin Luther did.
Sure.
Um, however, Tucker, we're
Yes.
here to talk about the future of Nintendo through a very particular angle.
Whoa. Damn.
Uh,
I've never even heard that word. That's how particular it is.
I was somewhere between specific and particular, then I realized it's too late.
Yeah.
The collision, you can't, it's head on at this
Oh
point.
yeah. It's
Um,
like Don't Look Up. Do you remember that movie?
Tucker, I think about it every day.
Good. Good.
We're going to talk about, in a particular sense, the notion that the next piece of Nintendo hardware, I think probably for the sake of our conversation, we'll probably call it the Switch 2.
Yeah.
Um, we're here to investigate on a philosophical level whether or not it will be like the current Switch is a
Hmm.
quote-unquote console of dreams. Now, if you're curious what we
Yes.
mean by that, this is actually a part two of a larger discussion.
Hmm.
And in part one, we talked about how the Switch, among its many crowning achievements, its library really feels like it's speaking directly to an Nintendo audience that longed for more of maybe that GameCube spirit. And if you want to see
Yeah.
a much deeper on that, we do in that video. So go check it out. But here, we're here to look ahead now instead of
Yeah.
sort of talk about the state of play as it is. And we're doing so with the help of our community. So another reason to
Yes.
join the Discord is
God, yeah.
because all of our videos pull from their usually insightful comments. I don't want to
Yeah.
say
Occasionally.
always.
Yeah.
Occasionally might be the
We
best
can't let
word
it go
for
to
it.
their head
No.
because then there'll be like a whole BLB community uprising. We won't be able to control them. Overthrow the government. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's important to me that we do not let the BLB community unionize.
It's a great point. Unlike SAG-AFTRA.
Tucker, if I may start the conversation with a comment, I'd like to begin with a comment from a member of our community. His name is Mr. Shintaro Furukawa, who left a comment for this video.
It sounds like you're starting like a sermon. Like I'd like to start with a quote, what do they call them? Passages, fucking verses. I don't know.
Probably
Bible shit.
no, I mean verse. That's from Devil May Cry. I don't really know what else that's from. Or Bayonetta.
All right,
Sorry, I meant
our
Bayonetta.
good friend of the show, Furukawa-san. What he has to
Yes,
say.
he said the following, as translated by Nintendo Everything. Quote, "We always keep in mind that if we do not keep putting out things that people truly want, they'll get bored of us.
Mm.
Right now, there are various forms of entertainment besides video games. I believe
Yeah.
that making people want to spend their precious time on video games, and Nintendo games no less, is a very harsh battle. We
Mhm.
approach everything while resolved to the fact that, at any time, people may start thinking they do not need Nintendo games anymore."
Yeah.
And I think this is a very interesting quote to sort of begin our conversation. The current president of Nintendo talking about the sort of urgency to, in some way, maybe reinvent. I mean, I think you can read between the lines of that quote in many ways. But Tucker, stage set, quote read, context established. What are you thinking about maybe where Nintendo's headspace is going into this now, what feels like almost a weekly rumored hardware reveal
Yeah.
for 2024? Who knows?
Yeah.
That's not particularly what we're speculating about, but instead
No.
sort of the
There will be a next piece of
yes.
hardware, and will that next piece of hardware's library over the course of an entire life cycle of system be able to follow the trend that the Switch set forth, which was answering the longtime cries of the hardcore Nintendo fan base in many of its series. Of course, last time we focused in on games that had been in development or rumored for a very long time, continuation of long-running series, returning to the roots of some series or reinventing them in substantial ways. Kirby, Pokemon, Mario, Zelda, Pikmin, Metroid, Smash, all these franchises had some element. And will Nintendo's next piece of hardware, colloquially known as the Switch 2, will it be able to continue that? And the reason I am going to go out on a limb, even with what Furkawa is saying, say no, is because I don't think Nintendo fans are in the place right now where every franchise has something that someone's like, oh my god, they need to do this next. Why haven't they done this? It's been such a long time since they've done this. There are certainly a few, but I think what's so exciting about being on the precipice of a next generation of Nintendo hardware is Nintendo has reached, I think, a really good balance between satiating its fans and answering longtime fan requests to where we are no longer being like, man, I really want that sandbox Mario. Man, I really want that Mario Kart with the great battle mode. Man, give me Pikmin 4 and 2D Metro. It's like, we did these things already. And it certainly is possible they continue on those tracks. But the next generation of Nintendo hardware, I think, allows Nintendo to be in a place where fans are content and maybe just waiting for Nintendo, and what Nintendo has been so good at for most of their history, for Nintendo to reinvent their franchises in ways that we are not thinking of or capable of thinking of because we're not, a bunch of 50-year-old Japanese game devs. Unfortunately, as much as I want to be. Nintendo has this track record of doing things that the fans don't expect and that becoming what the fans want more of. And what drives the industry forward, and that's why Nintendo is so important. But to reiterate, I think the next piece of Nintendo hardware will not be able to continue on that same track record because so many of those long-term dreams have been answered, and because of the clock sort of reset on so many of these franchises and so many of these ideas, that they just don't have the long-term fan dreams to like pull from anymore because they answered so many of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point because as we were talking about in the last video, in a very robust way, this idea that really the notion that the Switch is even a console of dreams stems from the fact that the sort of fan canon of games was building over a pretty long period of time where Nintendo was not speaking directly to maybe what we could sort of say is quote unquote our audience of Nintendo fans who are invested in their history and have been for generation. I think this quote is quite interesting. This notion that, quote, we always keep in mind that if we do not keep putting out things that people want, they'll get bored of us.
Yeah.
Is interesting because to sort of talk about another thing I did is a little while ago, I interviewed Kit and Krista about launching Splatoon.
Yeah.
And this idea from their perspective, from a marketing perspective, that there's sort of a shift within Nintendo through like the Wii U era where you could basically do whatever you wanted, try anything you can to get people interested in the brand right now because we need it.
Yeah.
The Switch era where things are a little bit more conservative in their messaging and a little bit more straight-laced in some ways. Obviously not in all ways. But I don't necessarily think that is going to change.
Yeah.
And so, as a result, I think that a component of giving people what they want is giving people what they expect. And you're saying that maybe there's less that we're hoping for, but I think what a lot of people are expecting is sort of a status quo, right?
Yes.
Another sandbox Mario, another Pikmin, another 2D Metroid. So I think that the next generation, from my perspective,
Smash Ultimate Terror.
Yeah. I honestly, maybe. I think that there's reason to believe what the sort of corporate, I think, position Nintendo's in right now is a little bit more conservative, that another might sort of become the refrain in part for the next system, which is maybe not a mistake. And I think maybe supported by historical precedent because the Game Boy was really successful. So we got another Game Boy.
Yeah.
The Wii was very successful. So we got another Wii. We got another DS.
Yeah, it's true.
Another is an idea that usually follows on from a success.
We got another Nintendo Entertainment System.
We got another Nintendo Entertainment System. We did not get another N64. We did not get another GameCube. We did not get another Virtual Boy.
Or Wii U.
We did not get another Wii U.
What would it have been? We got the Wii and the Wii U. So Wii is the group. The Wii U is targeted towards a singular. The fucking Wii everyone. I don't know. Wii
I think you'd have
global.
to go possessive.
Ah,
The
okay.
Wii yours.
Oh, I see. I see.
Um, but I think that's sort of the core of my contention here.
Sure.
I think that
Imagine the
we're going.
4DS.
I think that Nintendo's next piece of hardware is going to look and look in the most general sense of the idea of
Yeah,
look. I'm
yeah,
not specifically talking about like aesthetics. I think it's going to look a lot like Switch.
sure.
I honestly don't think that there's going to be much of a shift in tenor or feel or anything when the new hardware
Hmm.
comes out,
Yeah.
aside from the fact that we're all going to be inherently excited about whatever it is.
Hmm.
However, there is an off chance that Nintendo, still guided by ideas of people like Gunpei Yokoi and various
Yeah.
things, really surprise us. And I think this is really well encapsulated in a single short idea from my friend Murph.
Ho
So I
ho
want to read out
ho.
Murph's comment
Oh, Murphy boy.
and throw this over to
This
you.
is what we call Murph's law.
Yes. uh, Murph's Law includes a word that I believe he invented, but that's fine with me.
Oh, that's exciting.
Quote, the experimentalness of future titles hinges entirely on how experimental the next console
Mm,
is. And I
that's
think that's an
interesting.
interesting concept. So, and this is
Hmm.
actually something we were talking about before. The idea, and you put this really aptly, that a
As
lot of
usual.
games on Wii, for instance, were
Yeah.
developed around that hardware.
Yeah.
It's a very particular set of hardware. It resulted in a very particular set of games.
Hmm.
So I'm curious what you make of this notion that Murph is putting forward.
Um, I think that used to be true. I don't think
Sure.
it's true anymore. And I think that the Switch is the cleanest example of that. In that, even though in some ways the Switch is one of the most experimental pieces of hardware that has ever existed in its
Yeah.
modularity, in its home console and handheld nature, merging those two things, creating ideas like turning a single controller on a half controller on its side to become one controller. What who the fuck came up with this? These are
Yeah.
crazy. These are some of the craziest hardware design ideas that have ever happened. And there certainly are some games that lean into that. Mostly the what is it, EPD4, I believe, the group that does Ring Fit and Labo and those sort of games that are obviously things that could not have been done on other pieces of
Right.
hardware. Those lean into the experimentalness of the hardware. But frankly, and I think that Nintendo realized through the waning success of the Wii over the course of its life cycle and the blatant unsuccess of the Wii U is that having most of their games focus around the experimentalness of the hardware isn't isn't really what the majority of people want, and especially not that hardcore fan base that continues to grow as the video game industry ages, as people that grew up with certain consoles become more ingratiated in the game's ecosystem. The Switch goes from most Wii U games having gamepad controls and something different on the TV and or on the gamepad to the Switch. Most of its biggest games, a vast majority of its biggest games, do not utilize its hardware. Switch games
Yeah.
could run, the majority of them could run on any piece of hardware because they're just a controller and a game on a screen, other than things like one two switch or certain elements of
Yeah.
arms or labo. But other than that, most of the biggest games are on just a fucking pro controller on a TV, which is
Yeah.
the closest to every other system, Xbox and PlayStation, that Nintendo has almost ever been. So I don't think that correlation is necessarily accurate. I think it once was
Sure.
with older Nintendo hardware as they were trying to figure out what that balance was between putting experimentalness from the hardware into their biggest games. But they've largely moved away from that with the Switch generation, and
Yeah.
it has led to more of their games being more successful.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting. This idea I actually think about often, this notion that the Switch is on a hardware level, you're right, in one way very experimental. In some ways it's also quite historical. I mean, Nintendo's sort
Mhm.
of roots as a toy company, I think, are maybe more evident in the Switch's hardware design than maybe any piece of Nintendo
Sure.
hardware.
Yeah.
The joy in the very simple tactile fun of putting the Joy-Con on, taking them off, opening the
Yeah.
kickstand, slotting, docking your system, taking it out. I think that there's a major difference between the ways that Switch hardware innovates
Hmm.
and the ways that other Nintendo hardware innovates.
Sure.
Because its experimental nature is almost entirely quality of life.
Sure.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the Joy-Con, the motion control of the Joy-Con, the HD rumble of the Joy-Con, various things like that do open up some gameplay possibility.
Hmm.
But for the most part, the sort of quote unquote hardware gimmicks of the Switch are way more minimal than any we've ever seen before
Yeah.
because they've released a
Well, they're less
SKU.
pervasive, is what I would say.
I
Is
think,
in
yeah,
order to have a game on the DS or on the Wii, you
yeah,
had no other option but then to have you're using a Wii remote. So then this thing
yeah,
has weird buttons and less buttons than you're fucking used to. When on the DS
right.
you have a second screen, you got to use it or you're gonna look like an idiot. So you got to develop the game in a different way. But the Switch is a one screen console
Yeah.
with controllers.
It,
So you're right. It's very different in the way that it's very possible to make a totally traditional game on the Switch. It was not
yeah.
possible to do that on the DS or the Wii.
I mean, the other interesting thing is that unlike the DS and Wii, I think to kind of continue your point forward, this idea of it being pervasive, and that's a great word for it, is that there are SKUs of Switch that literally do not have any of these
True,
features.
that's a great point.
And so the Switch Lite is
They're
sort of,
skew.
yeah. The Switch Lite inherently is, to me, in some way, an admission that the Switch is about a more traditional style of play.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm not necessarily certain that it its games being more traditional is a sign of this rule being less true. I think it's more a
Mm.
sign of the sort of experimental nature of the Switch hardware being something that's a lot more interested about the player's quality of life than it is
Sure.
sort of directly informing how you design games, like
Hmm.
as you're saying, the Wii or the DSR. But I think that you're still right in the sense of like Nintendo learned that this is a sort of innovation that is the most palatable to the most people.
Yeah.
So I don't expect that the next system is going to sort of introduce, at least at its core, a new quote unquote new way to play, a new way to interact with
Mm.
games. I don't think
Sure.
that's going to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually what's I think the most interesting about the moment that we're in, even if it is the next system is a Switch 2 and carries alongside most of those same design elements. This moment has continued to happen across the course of games history, and with Nintendo, where people are like, man, I don't know what could be next. I doubt
Yeah,
that they can do anything new. And time again, they have done it, even with the Switch, with its more quality of life hardware gimmicks. We're at a point where the Switch is the most successful piece of Nintendo hardware. Is it behind the DS? I can't
still
remember.
behind the DS.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, but not by like a huge margin. Regardless, it's one of their
like
most
30
successful.
million. It'll.
That's fucking piss and change. But regardless, where the fuck was I going with this? I derailed myself by not knowing my own facts. The idea that we feel like they probably can't do anything new
Yeah,
is true right now, and it may be true for the next piece of hardware. But there will come a time where Nintendo has this other crazy fucking idea that we've never thought of before that
yeah.
completely reinvents how the games are positioned. But I agree with you that I don't think it's this next piece of hardware.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Nintendo realizes that they are on the precipice of a very exciting moment where, with the theme park and the movies and everything, their brand recognition is as big as it's been. And I mean, you could make an argument for maybe ever.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and so they, there's no doubt that the current Nintendo hears the number of people saying you cannot release a piece of non-hybrid hardware.
yeah,
I think they sort of know that they're in this box right now where the only way to continue their current momentum is to release a system that, as President Furukawa is saying, is gives people sort of what they expect. And I think what they
yeah,
expect
yeah.
is another Switch they can dock and undock and play with, and it makes sense to everybody. Because
Nintendo
that's the other,
loves things that you can dock and play with.
so do you.
Thank you.
Do you want to pick a comment to read?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Let's go with Gravity, who says, personally, I think they have to know that they'd be dumb to just drop the Switch concept now, which is kind of what we were just saying. Like,
Yeah.
you can't do a not hybrid piece of hardware. They also say, sure, they'll probably iterate on things in some way, but still keep the handheld / console hybrid concept. I do expect something weird or wacky to be added to the next system, though. Not sure what yet.
Yeah, I mean, it is something I think about because I do think that nonetheless there still will be a thing, right?
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I don't I no matter how many people try to say this is the case, I just do not believe that the sole notion of the new hardware is that it is simply more powerful.
Yes, I agree with that.
I just don't think that that's the way Nintendo's ever
Maybe like
operated,
a
and I don't think
third
it's going to
Joy-Con on the
change.
bottom.
A third Joy-Con, sure. And this is where it gets exciting to me because I do maintain that it's going to be a very
Maybe it's shaped
traditional.
like a circle, and you got just buttons around the outside.
Maybe that NX
The
leak
oval one.
thing
Yeah,
is actually going to be what it is.
maybe.
And you dock it by sort of throwing it like a frisbee into like a chute under your TV.
Ooh, that'd be nice. Yeah,
I do think that there's going to be something going on here,
yeah,
and I'm curious to see what. I mean, it could be. The thing about it is, it really could be, as DS was, a lot of, or sorry, as 3DS was to DS, a lot of sort of same form factor and non-obtrusive,
yeah.
clear upgrades.
Sure.
And I mean, the DSi kind of predated a lot of these things, but
Hmm.
camera
Yeah.
and all of the many things that 3DS had that only specific models of DS had, I kind of see the next system being like that. I
Hmm.
mean, I do think that a camera alone on Switch would open up a lot of really cool design possibilities.
Yeah, yeah, and a
I mean,
microphone on the Switch, which doesn't
yeah,
currently have.
I think that that's probably the way that they're going to go because the
Sure,
3DS
I agree with that. Yeah.
totally maintains the DS's form factor and its
Hmm.
spirit, but it did introduce new ideas that allowed us to engage with games differently.
Sure.
Um, I don't think that the next system is going to have 3D. I don't think that makes
No,
any sense.
that's gone. Yeah.
But I think you could. I think you could. I think you could. I think you could look at 3DS as a model for the ways that the next system is going to be playful and new,
Sure.
but still very similar.
Yeah, yeah. I would agree with that. And the interesting thing about that is, much like what 3DS games were to DS games, I see the direction of the library, because ultimately that's what this conversation is about for this
Yeah,
next piece of hardware, being that evolution of game design, which is we've done so many of these ideas that involve touchscreens, and now with the Switch, they have returned to the idea of doing more traditional games and having some games that are using this hardware in crazy ways. And now that we've spent almost a full decade doing that at this point, we have the experience to flesh those out in a deeper way, and is why
yeah,
I am excited for the potential of this next system to not be revolutionizing, but instead iterating upon what the Switch's both hardware and design philosophy were for its games. Because I'm the kind of person that sees the DS library and the 3DS library, and while I would clearly say the DS library is more innovative, I prefer the vast majority of the 3DS library because they feel like the more fully formed versions of what came before. When people say that the DS had console level home console level games on it, I'm like, maybe, sure, if you're squinting and you're looking at it from a weird angle. But then the 3DS really did up that to where
yeah.
you're playing 3D Land versus 3D World, and the difference is screen resolution and multiplayer, as opposed to, you know, the DS Mario games were a lot simpler in comparison. So I am excited to see the expansion that I think will come to a lot of these games. When you think about now that they have made open world Pokemon games and 3D Kirby games and returned to the sandbox Mario style and have done so many tracks for Mario Kart, they have built those templates now, and
Yeah.
the devs are experienced with these ideas. So a next sandbox Mario, a next open world generation of Pokemon will be probably the more fully formed, if not more innovative, but more fully formed versions, because they're building on what came before with the Switch, setting this in motion.
Yeah, and I mean, th- there's a lot to be said for the ways that when Nintendo switched to HD with the Wii U, they had a lot of issues with
Yeah.
development, and
Mm,
a lot of those early Wii U games looked quite plasticky, and a lot of them were
sure.
delayed, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of, and it took a while to sort of get into that groove. And I think they got deeper into the groove with Switch, and I think you're totally right that they're really going to be able to settle into it here.
Yeah.
And I think that that is quite exciting. I mean, 3D Kirby is a great example
Yeah.
because you think about Triple Deluxe on 3DS.
Yeah.
That's a very good game, but
Yeah.
Planet Robobot is in the top I think kind of universally acclaimed as in the top 5, if not top 3 Kirby games ever made.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think you're totally
And you
right.
can easily imagine the fact that HAL has put out basically 2 games this
Yeah.
generation, 2 big games, and now they have the idea of 3D Kirby. We can get 2 3D Kirby games on the next system pretty comfortably.
Yeah.
And so that is just exciting to see these new ideas, whether they are new because they are completely reinventing things like many franchises have, or because they've returned to the more hardcore roots of things like in the N64 and GameCube days, continue on that track record and building upon those, as opposed to hitting the left turn because, frankly, for most of generations of Nintendo hardware, they've been forced to hit that left turn.
Right.
They've gone NES to SNES. Okay, that makes sense. And then oh shit, we gotta do fucking 3D now. Oh god, what's gonna happen? And then oh god, we gotta do motion controls. Oh god, we gotta do 2 screens for the DS and the 3DS, and we gotta do a gamepad for the Wii U. But if they're not forced to make that left turn, there will be a different kind of progression that they're able to do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of their most peculiar hardware has come out of a sort of need.
Sure.
Virtual Boy was made because they needed something before the N64. Wii was made because they needed to do something different after GameCube failed.
Yeah.
This will be the first time, or I don't want to say the first time, but one of the few times when Nintendo is in such a dominant position that all they really need to do is be as half as successful as they are right now on a hardware level.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think it's interesting to see what they do then. I mean, to be fair, we are talking about all these points of continuity and everything, but the GBA, which did not do as well as the Game Boy, but also had a much shorter time to screw around with, was still a very successful piece of hardware. And we got the DS after it. And there's no continuity there, right? So there is a chance that we're totally wrong. I just don't think that in this current moment we are. But I want to transition, as you're saying, more towards games. I do just want to read Abby's comment quickly, just as we're on our way out. Abby says, obviously, the Switch is a great console, and a simple spec bump, better screen, better controllers would sell really well for the successor, but I also really like the more funky side of Nintendo. I'd be glad to see them try a new console and see what features they come up with. Sure. And I think that Abby does speak to it sort of just a general curiosity. And as I'm saying in this example of going from GBA to DS, they could really captivate people with something new. But they'd have to be really careful about it. And I just think that this is a Nintendo that's even more careful than the careful iteration that brought us to DS. But I want to read a longer comment to get us really more deeply into the software side of things.
Perfect.
And this comes from our friend Bro, who...
You put him down as Brogan Talks Games here.
Yeah, that'd be funny.
You wacky bastard.
Bro says a little bit about hardware that I'm honestly going to skip because I think he's got a pretty substantial bit about the games themselves.
Yeah.
As to this notion of
we love bits here at Backlog Banter.
We love a bit.
Yeah.
Bro says,
I don't have a game within reach. I could do my classic throw the game behind me bit. Actually, hold on.
Okay, yeah, you do
fucking Spider-Man PS4.
Perfect.
What is this? What's this bit? This is a fucking elephant. I don't even really remember what the bit was.
No, I think that was well executed. Bro says games, I think, are often franchise-based as to whether they're going to sort of meet expectations or do something different. There are games that are going to want to consistently push to appease fans and deliver solid returns. Splatoon hasn't fundamentally changed. Fire Emblem won't be radically reinvented beyond what it is now. Pokemon will maintain its general trajectory. Interesting titles will be side titles within those IP or franchises that demand this unique sort of design philosophy. Something like Star Fox confuses Nintendo because the, quote, dream for Star Fox is largely stagnant. Yeah. They can revisit Star Fox 64 for its glory days, come with something completely new, or revisit Star Fox 64 with a unique gimmick tailored to the console. Command, Assault, and Adventures are explorations into how Star Fox could have evolved, and they weren't promising.
Yeah.
Flag on the play. This is what I mean by the balance, and if a franchise shows promise in either reliably delivering on dreams or offering a new promising hook to evolve the franchise at large, they'll take it when they see it. I think this is an interesting idea.
Yeah. Well, no, don't delete it yet. I want to... Fuck it. I'm bringing it back. All right. Yeah, I think this is interesting because I think it's actually a point that I haven't really thought too much about, but is that there are Nintendo franchises that are experimental and there are those that aren't. And in my mind, Nintendo is experimental and they're always almost always changing things up from game to game. But when he references things like Splatoon and Fire Emblem, I mean, we talked last time about how the fact that Splatoon has never changed. It's
Yeah.
only been iterative, and Fire Emblem has only done its evolution through new, I don't know, new hardware. I guess there hasn't been that many like experimental changes to Fire Emblem games. I mean, like the most you can say is like Fate's having this like base camp thing and Garamok Monastery showing up as a 3D environment in Three Houses, but like these are largely superfluous things.
Yeah.
Um, but it is with the more other than Splatoon in-house Nintendo IP where they are really good at continually reinventing their franchises, and I think this is where I want to draw in my biggest excitement for this next phase of Nintendo games, because while I am excited that they will probably be continuing along a similar path, and I think there is a different kind of excitement out of that because I think the games will all be great. What the one thing I do love about Nintendo is that even within returning to roots or continuing upon the same track record, they've always managed to give us something that we aren't aware of because they are that different kind of thought process. They have this experience that allows them to draw upon other franchises, other things they've worked on, and reinvent things in subtle ways, but in the long term, substantial ways. And I think one of the great examples, or two of the great examples of this last generation of hardware, are one of their most iterative games and one of their games that returns to roots but then reinvents things on a very granular level, which is Tears of the Kingdom, including game physics and mechanics in terms of the building and the abilities that have never been tried in video games before. Yeah, it is building upon Breath of the Wild and looks maybe the most similar between two Nintendo games that two Nintendo games have ever looked. But on that mechanical and creativity basis, the idea of Fuse and Ultra Hand are some of the most impressive game design feats that have ever been done within iterative sequels. So even if this next generation of games continues and we get the next open world Zelda game or the next sandbox Mario, they can still, within that continuation, reinvent the wheel in like substantial design ways. And the other one that I was referencing is Super Mario Odyssey, a game that takes its roots very directly from 64 and Sunshine, but then completely reinvents the way you interact with the world through the capture mechanic. An idea that had never really been thought of before. The idea that power-ups can be the enemies and they can change how you move and interact with the world and be used for puzzles in different ways. The capture mechanic is a recontextualization of what came before, the idea that Mario has power-ups, but completely changes the feel of that game and its identity. And that's what I'm so excited for, seeing the next sandbox Mario, the next open world Zelda. I believe in Nintendo's ability to, even within the constraints of iterating rather than innovating, still continuing or still incorporating elements of innovation that put them distinct from what came before within those franchises that are open to that reinvention. I don't expect the next Splatoon or Fire Emblem to be something wildly different innovation wise, but there is the expectation from Nintendo's core teams that games like Mario and Zelda will have that next weird idea that you and I, even though as the most hardcore Zelda and Mario fans you can think of, we can't conceptualize what they'll do
Yeah.
next because they have this X factor that we're not keyed into.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're referencing and what Bro is talking about in sort of a general sense is that there are going to be a sort of a set of constants, and some of those constants will change, and some of those constants will be pretty standard innovation. I mean, even a franchise
Yeah,
like WarioWare, for
yeah,
instance, WarioWare might play differently, but it just plays differently because it's on different hardware. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
there are what 10 WarioWare games about, and other
Mhm.
than DIY and Game and Wario, they are all the exact same idea,
Yeah, same
but just
structure. Yeah.
sort of filtered through whatever the hardware inherently allows for. But then,
Hmm.
as you're saying, there are franchises like Mario, Zelda to a lesser extent before Breath of the Wild, but
Yeah, yeah.
that's still true to
Hmm.
some degree, that are ready to change. And I think you're right that Nintendo might be a little bit more interested in that change now, even
Hmm.
because Breath of the Wild was a massive, massive departure for Zelda.
Yeah.
And you're right that in some ways Odyssey is recontextualization, but in some ways it was sort of the step towards something totally different. And if
Yeah,
Bowser's Furious next step towards that, and
that's
whatever
a
is
great
next
point.
is
That's a
somewhere
great point.
between those games, something that's going to be totally different, right? So
Hmm.
I think that there is something to be said, and this is kind of a refrain you've had through this entire discussion, which I think is really apt. This idea that maybe if things are a little bit more iterative, that actually in some ways leaves more space for evolution,
Mm,
because you can sort of tease out more from the ideas you already have,
yeah,
and you're not trying to suddenly reinvent the wheel or sort of
yeah,
fit your game into a box that's a totally different shape.
yeah. No, that's actually a great point. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking of a couple other examples of things that we now have that space for. The continuation, but the innovation within the continuation
yeah,
is things like we now have a template for what modern open world Pokemon, 2D Mario, and Pikmin are.
yeah,
And you can easily imagine obviously a Gen 10 is going to come at some point, or even the next Legends game for Pokemon, or the next Mercury Steam 2D Metroid game, or the next Pikmin game, since Pikmin 4 are looking to be on track to be the biggest Pikmin game. And so hopefully they'll continue that franchise. You can see the next system getting those games, but having them be different enough, similar enough, but different enough to where it's like, oh wow, oh that's really cool. Yeah, we're getting the next 2D Metroid, but it's 2D Metroid with a twist. It's open world Pokemon, frankly, but better because they now have the groundwork to build that upon. So
yeah,
I think that those examples are frankly where I think maybe the most Nintendo fans are feeling that's the dream right now is the the twist versions of these great games that
yeah,
we've gotten on this piece of hardware. The built upon uh 3D Kirby with a Robobot style spin. The new Pokemon Legends game that's more fleshed out and has a more distinct identity because they now have this baseline to work on. And even though those aren't the oh man, I really want Pokemon to go open world, Kirby to go 3D. These aren't the radical changes of the game formula from the base level. I because I'm so happy with the majority of games that we've gotten on the Switch, I'm equally excited to see what
yeah.
the next is, even if it's not that reinvention.
I actually think this is a really interesting point to just sort of cap off with what our friend Sam, who I think is currently going by Mr. Capcom Husband right now, had to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Uh, I will not attempt to predict what's going on in the sick and demented minds at Nintendo headquarters, but I'm interested to see if they utilize the momentum some of their series have cultivated in the past few years to release new titles or try and revive other titles.
Hmm.
Now I think Sam is really encapsulating what you shared here, this idea of building on frameworks and
Yeah.
building on new frameworks in some of these cases, in cases something
Hmm.
like Pikmin. But this notion of revival, I think, also sort of dovetails with what Bro is saying about these franchises that Nintendo seems sort of lost with. I
Yeah.
mean, I think
Yeah.
you could make a good case for Metroid and Pikmin being series Nintendo was lost with, and they
Yeah.
found
Oh,
their
definitely.
way with. And I
Hmm.
think that a really exciting through line of this generation for me has been the ways that Nintendo has really laser focused on bringing franchises that were flagging to the forefront. I
Yeah.
think that Xenoblade,
Hmm.
Metroid, and Pikmin are the clearest
Yeah.
examples of that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's impossible that Nintendo looks at another series, to Bro's point, like Star Fox, that they're
Mm.
confused with, and says, hey, we saw that we can make something familiar but new. I
Yeah.
think that's what's at the core of those three franchises I laid out. They're
Sure.
familiar but they're
Definitely.
new.
Yeah.
And I think that this notion could let them look at a series like Star Fox and say, hey, we tried
Hmm.
a lot, but we know what works. And even if it's a stagnant idea, frankly, Metroid Dread is not that far away from what it was in the past. But
Hmm.
Metroid Dread, by merit of there being so much space,
That's a
has
great point.
accrued a lot of new ideas and softened a lot of harder edges. And even
Yeah.
though if you scaled Metroid Dread back to what could have been possible in Game Boy Advance, the games would have been fairly similar.
Hmm.
Metroid Dread, by nature of its period in time, is very distinct. And I
Yeah.
think that's a game like Star Fox is in a similar position. And I think that the fact that we did see these franchises come back, as Sam is saying, using this general momentum, he's talking about more
Hmm.
specific franchise momentum, but I think Nintendo also has a general momentum
Hmm.
that could easily turn out a Star Fox game that sells 2 million copies and is
Yeah.
at the top of the franchise. I don't think that that's hard, and I think that Nintendo recognizes now after Metroid and Pikmin in particular and Xenoblade they can do this.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually very interesting when you think about the position they've put themselves in with so many of these series being more popular and critically acclaimed than they ever have been,
Yeah.
uh, and also their just general brand recognition and IP are going to be skyrocketing over the course of the next few years as Nintendo Super Nintendo Land World, excuse me, Super Nintendo World expands and their movie efforts expand. So just culturally, they'll have more knowledge about them, and you can see that Mario is in a great place right now with this movie, and you can see that continuing for a little bit. But there has to be a point where they reach into quote unquote their back pockets to pull up the next generation of Nintendo IP that are going to be reinvented to be more popular than they ever have been. And I do think there's a distinct possibility that with some solid effort, a first Star Fox game since Zero, or even go before that, like first big push Star Fox game in 15, 20 years, that gets a pop from them, and they're able
Yeah.
to capitalize that on and build upon that and bring Star Fox back to the relevance that it hasn't had since the N64 or GameCube eras. And even with things like Punch Out and F Zero, these franchises that are beloved and just waiting, they're ripe for
Yeah.
that similar, but because they're modern, different iteration that will instantly catapult them to more popularity because Nintendo recognizes they have the ability to rekindle these franchises and work towards getting them to that level of recognizability and popularity that they can make the next Metroid movie, or make a animated Star Fox TV show that's never happened before. These are possible because they now recognize they have the ability to catapult their quote unquote forgotten franchises or lost franchises into a new phase of popularity.
Yeah, I mean, I think at risk of just devolving into just talking about why I think Star Fox is coming back in the first place, but the other thing that I
Isn't
think
or is?
is
Okay.
I think that Nintendo has also, and this is an idea that I've spoken about multiple times with my friend Jonathan Holmes, this idea that Nintendo sort of realizes where all their franchises or a lot of their franchises fit to the market and they stay
Mm-hmm.
there. I to the reason I had to throw a flag on the play of what Bro was saying about Star Fox is that Star Fox Assault in particular was actually a really interesting game when you look back on it, of Nintendo saying, hey, let's give Star Fox to Bandai Namco and let's identify this idea that Star Fox can be something we don't have, which is
Yeah.
this third person shooter
Yeah.
in this huge operatic sci-fi setting.
Yeah.
That is
Much more akin to Halo, frankly.
yeah, in some ways, I think you made that argument. I think it fits very nicely into a lot of the other third person lock-on shooters of its era. I
Mm-hmm.
really think that the current Nintendo, who says, look, we've got our racing game, we've got our big platformer, Animal
Mm-hmm.
Crossing has its place, X has
Mm-hmm.
its place, Y has its place, and now we have our big third person open world action game in Zelda.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that a sort of competitive Star Fox shooter, be
Yeah.
it on land or in an R Wing, is out of the realm of possibility. I think
Yeah.
Nintendo could.
Nintendo's Battlefield.
Nintendo's Battlefield. I really do think that they could. That
Star
they.
Fox 2042.
Yes, that's what it was.
Yeah.
I think that they could look at a franchise like that and be like, this would fit a hole in our IP catalog that is
Yeah.
not being filled by basically anything right now.
Yeah.
Not even by Splatoon, really. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that the current Nintendo could look at a series like Star Fox, bring it back. I also think that after the Gran Turismo film is a massive success, Nintendo is going to have to get F Zero back in shape so they can make their F Zero movie, and
Mm-hmm.
and even you and I can go from gamer to racer in a way that feels a bit more personally important to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got 2 comments left, Tucker.
God. So soon? Ending so soon?
Should we give Shaman's or Sith Scott the penultimate comment privileges?
Let's go to Shamans because there's a little bit shorter. This Shamans says, I definitely feel like they're going to stick to the basics for first party games rather than any experimental ones. They've tried a few times to introduce new IPs, and only Splatoon has really stuck. I don't think we're going to get another ARMS type of experiment anytime soon. Now, this is very interesting.
It's very interesting. I don't agree. What do you think?
I don't agree either. Yeah. Well, because I think what Nintendo has done in the last few generations is create a new stable of new IP that are more background IP. I mean, the idea that they have created no new IP this generation is false because Ring Fit Adventure and Labo are massively successful and totally different than what came before and are like factually new IP. When we
Yeah.
think about more traditional character based Nintendo IP, that is true that there's been ostensibly only one, maybe two per generation. I mean, you think about the previous generation, maybe it's a little bit higher because there was downloadable games that had new
Yeah.
identities like Box Boy and Pushmo and stuff like that. Um, but I don't think I don't think Nintendo's lost that spark. I think that with the success of the Switch, they now have the space and frankly the money to make those kind of risks.
Yeah.
And while you were saying about Kit and Chris is saying Splatoon and Wii U era, they can kind of just do whatever the fuck they want. They're just trying shit and see if it sticks. They've reached the point with the success of the Switch and the current popularity of their brand that trying new IPs is more financially possible now than it has been in a very long time. And so with the success of all of their major franchises, I absolutely think there's totally space. And with
Yeah.
all the teams that they have and all the ideas that they have to create something new. And even if it's just a one-off like ARMS, I don't think there will be a single Nintendo generation that goes by without that new weird IP being tried.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I've got a lot to think about this. I mean, I think that people often forget that the most successful games on the Wii were new IP.
Sure.
The Wii Sports, Wii Fit, Wii
Yeah.
Party, Wii Play, these are new IP. And you show a me to your average person, and the me is more recognizable and identifiable than
Most Nintendo characters.
most Nintendo characters. So I think that there's this something of a misconception that because Nintendo's core roster of IP doesn't grow that much, or it grows as we're saying in casual software, that
Mhm.
it's that Nintendo's not creating new characters and creating new worlds.
Yeah.
Because Woohoo Island is a beloved location for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Ring Fit Adventure is one of the best selling games on Switch.
Yeah. And now we've got Spoko Square.
Now I've spoken. I think that maybe my biggest.
And the Game Builder Garage, the little fucking orange guy.
We do have him, yes.
Yeah.
If I had to give the Switch's library one kind of overarching criticism, is I think that the erosion of the sort of digital downloadable new IP,
Yeah.
I think that's where the system has been the weakest.
No, definitely. I
I
totally
mean,
agree with that.
yeah, I mean, there's a very small handful. I mean, who
Yes.
doesn't love Stretcher Red and good job guy? But
Yeah.
I think that that Shaman's maybe right, and that we'll continue to see the biggest franchises be the characters we know. But
Mhm.
as we're both laying out, there are plenty of examples that are maybe a little bit more backgrounded of that new IP being everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sushi Striker, Ever Oasis. I mean, there's all kinds of things.
Snipper clips.
Snipper Clips.
Yeah.
Snipper Clips was the sort of game that I wish we gotten more of on Switch.
Absolutely. I mean, Snipper Clips is one of the best games on Switch, and
Yeah.
and it's frankly kind of fucking nuts that we never got a sequel to that. What the fuck is that team working on? Who the fuck? Frankly, I don't even know who they are. Sorry, Snipper Clips team.
Yeah.
But Tuber Clips is fucking waiting for you,
I think...
or the next IP from that team, and
Yeah.
that I think is what I'm most excited for. The idea that Nintendo has made a lot of collaborations
Yeah.
with people this generation. They've tried a lot of smaller things, but in the idea that the team that made Snipper Clips has such a creative idea that gives us a distinct aesthetic and distinct characters in those little Snipper Clips guys, and that they might be working on a next Nintendo published IP, not in first party capacity, but in the idea that expands what Nintendo's scale of games releasing,
Yeah.
and with new colorful ideas and aesthetics and characters, that they're Nintendo is probably working on publishing that team's next game probably within the first year of the next system.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the other thing to just remember is, like, ARMS has sold almost 3 million copies.
Yeah.
Most established Nintendo franchises would fucking kill to sell 3 million copies of the game.
Yeah.
I think that it's not necessarily accurate to suggest that a game like ARMS was a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we must remember that even though it has not come to fruition in a massive way, there was a quote, I can't remember if it was from Kimishima at the end of his reign as president or the beginning of Furukawa's, but saying, we want to and are investigating new IP.
Yeah.
And
I think it was Reggie.
Maybe
Reggie
it's
said
right. Yeah.
that.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
but like Splatoon didn't have to happen. I think
Yeah.
that's the other thing that I think people kind of forget. Splatoon didn't have to happen. Splatoon was
Hmm.
supposed to be a Mario game. It could have
Yeah.
sold a fair number of units as a Mario spinoff on Wii U and been a cool thing and moved on from. But Nintendo chose to do that, and they chose to make ARMS, and they chose
Hmm.
to get Dylan and Box Boy and Pushmo and all of these series on 3DS. They chose to do Ring Fit. They chose to have that not be a recognizable character. I do think that Nintendo has always, and you're totally right, will continue to, on small scales, publishing little games like Snipper Clips, to
Yeah.
big scales, having a lot of casual interest in new software. It's going to happen. I don't think that this is something that
Yeah.
is in the past, because I don't think it's ever been in the past.
No. Yeah. And, yeah, and even if it is closer to being in the past with just Generation X, that's a fair claim to make.
I would say that
This
it's
is the least they
probably
focused on new IP.
I,
Is that true?
it's something I would have to think about. I mean,
Yeah.
it
It
might be.
must be. Yeah.
I think you
Interesting.
could.
Yeah.
I think well, let's do a little bit of research into that because that's an interesting idea. Because I actually don't know off the top of my head. My impulse would probably be if we're also counting downloadable software and counting everything as a whole
Hmm.
package. I would say the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I we need to think more about it.
Yeah. We all. Hey, we're not mentioning it, but we have a new Nintendo character this year. MC Horace.
Of course, I
Yeah.
love MC Horace, and I remember playing that game, and I didn't just have fun because we were drinking.
No, of course not. God, no.
Last comment comes from Sith Scott, who says, I anticipate Nintendo will still be trying to make fan dream games rather than trying to make the expectation defying ones, mainly because they will probably go the safer routes in gaming as more and more money goes into them. The
Hmm.
issue might be that they may not want the issue might be that they may not be able to continue its run of games with the longer game schedules.
Hmm.
The pipeline is so full that it might not be for some time, but the longer and longer schedules will start to wane on the library and funds.
Hmm.
The one dream I wish we got uh, is one we're actually getting with Super Mario RPG. So maybe we'll get an OG Paper Mario type remaster, a new Paper Mario that's more like N64 and GameCube Paper Mario games. Now, this is a very interesting comment because don't know I don't know if it's right, but I don't know if we can say it's wrong yet. Because I do
Sure.
think that there is an interesting X factor here where we often do talk about Nintendo's budgets being more conservative and their release schedules being far busier and the
Hmm.
time between review and release being shorter. And their teams obviously make many things. It's not like the team that made Odyssey is just iterating on a 3D Mario. Obviously, they've done
Yeah.
many other projects.
Hmm.
Um, But I think what Scott is pointing to on a more general level that I think is a compelling point is the idea of, well, if we do put this team on Donkey Kong, what
Yeah.
would they be making instead? I think that the idea of opportunity cost
Hmm.
is very important to Nintendo in particular because you think about a lot of Sony's teams, for instance, and the number of things that Guerrilla Games could be working on is very small.
Yeah.
They're probably either making a Horizon game or a Killzone game. It's unlikely
But
that they'd be doing something else.
and they're definitely not making a Killzone game, so there's really only one option.
Right. I think what Scott sort of is cluing us into is this idea that Nintendo's teams often are on all kinds of different IP. The Mario Kart team went to work on ARMS and they worked on
Yeah.
Animal Crossing and there's crossover talent everywhere. So I
Hmm.
think that there is always an opportunity cost to consider of when this game is being made, that game is not being made because this team
Hmm.
makes both and what's going on here. So that's gonna be an interesting thing to watch Nintendo juggle.
Yeah. The interesting thing is now that I have followed Nintendo's internal studios very closely over the course of this last generation, retroactively done some research on what they were able to do in past generations, I don't know if much of the longer dev time, higher budget problems apply to Nintendo. It certainly
I
could,
don't think they do.
and I think that Tears of the Kingdom is the closest example we've ever gotten to long budget, long dev time, big budget, take a long time to come out between entries games.
Yeah.
But when you think about the fact that you're right that There's a lot of crossover between internal dev teams, even internal external dev teams like Monolith Soft, who are very different but help on most of Nintendo's in-house games, like
Hmm.
the vast majority of them, and they work on very different kinds of things by putting a handful of team members who are experienced in this one area, or that there's collaboration between internal teams constantly, and to the fact that even with the teams that are known for making consistently making one IP, they're not just one IP. Every Nintendo team is consistently known for making two or three
Yeah.
IP. And that, I think, lends a variety in IP and scale. That means that Nintendo's library are never getting stale outside of Game Freak because they only make one game, Game Freak making too many fucking Pokemon games. I mean, that's really the only example.
Yeah.
When Intelligent Systems is the ones making Fire Emblem and also WarioWare, those two games could not be more fucking
And
different.
Paper Mario.
And exactly, and Paper Mario, and so Intelligent Systems has put out what 4, 5 games this generation,
Yeah.
and almost all of them have been well received, and they've been very different. And fucking what's the goddamn Luigi's Mansion game?
Next Level Games.
Next Level Games made that, and they made Strikers, and presumably they're
Punch Out
working
in the
on
past.
yeah, and presumably they're working on remaking Dark Moon. And like, there's a difference between what Nintendo puts their in-house developers on versus what everyone else in the industry is doing. So when you think about
Yeah.
the fact that that Guerrilla or Sony Santa Monica or Naughty Dog, actually Naughty Dog is surprisingly flexible because they've been doing a lot of like remakes of their stuff and stuff. But other dev teams or other publishers put external dev teams on the experimental titles, but Nintendo is not averse to just saying, "Look, you guys have been making this for a long time. You've got another idea. Let's put a budget behind this and see if it fucking sticks," or
Yeah.
or, or continue to build up two or three IP within each studio. And I think that kind of prevents them from having that stagnation, and especially because they're so good at controlling their budgets, having ballooning budgets and dev cycles.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why I was focusing more on the study of the opportunity cost because I don't think it's accurate to say that Nintendo's development teams are under the same pressures that the average AAA development team is under.
Yeah,
Partially because their games just cost less because there's not the same sort of technological mandate upon
yeah,
them. There's a lot of reasons why Nintendo's games are going to cost less and be developed in a more nimble way. And I think the greatest example of that is actually the fact that Tears of the Kingdom was an outlier, and Nintendo explicitly said this is our biggest game, and they've been
yeah,
very open about how much polishing time went into that. And the point that I think that not enough people have been talking about is that it is still their only $70 game they've ever made.
yeah, yeah,
Multiple games after Tears of the Kingdom were $50 actually.
yeah.
It
Or will be $50.
will be $50. So I just think it's important to note that I think that Sith Scott raises an interesting point about the pressures of game dev that I think are sometimes not thought about when we think about Nintendo. But I
Yeah.
think we need to think about a different set of pressures. I don't think we need to think about the
Mm.
spend 7 years making Days Gone type of pressure. It's more a
Yeah.
it's more a hey, we are literally have our hands and we got our fingers in the pie. I don't really understand that phrase because I've never really put my finger in the pie. Like, why would I
We can
do
change
that?
that.
Whew. I think that you gotta they're under a different set of stress, and so that's part of why I never get too hung up on this idea of a Nintendo franchise being dead.
Hmm.
Nintendo's just juggling everything,
Yeah.
and so I really do think that F-Zero and Star Fox and things are going to have their time, but there's a hierarchy of priorities, and there's a set number of teams that can do certain things, and
Hmm.
you're bouncing between them, right? You're bouncing
Yeah.
around. So we'll see. We'll see what the limiting factor is here. If it's going to be teams working on really big things so they can't get to the smaller games, or if we
Yeah.
sort of level back out to a balance of both, because this will also be Nintendo's second piece of hardware, where it's the only active piece of hardware in the ecosystem.
It's a good point. Yeah.
Because obviously everything unified, and we just have the Switch. We don't have two pieces of Nintendo hardware right
Hmm.
now. Like they're all basically always has been. So I'd be
Yeah.
curious to sort of know. I guess we won't know, but I guess we'll sort of see the results of whatever lessons they learned about how to balance having everybody point to the one piece of hardware
Yeah.
for the successor. So Tucker, much to
Abram,
consider.
Much to consider. A lot of interesting points brought up here. We talked about like every different element of Nintendo's design
Yeah.
philosophy and experience. I think we fucking run our gamut or run our course. What's the fucking thing? I don't
Um,
know.
I don't know. Let's ask our good friend Horse off course.
Nintendo's got two horse characters.
Do you think that MC Horus and Horse off course have ever A had sexual intercourse, and B,
I think
do
about
you
that often. Yeah.
do you think that that would be bestiality, considering that MC Horus
Mm.
is
Mm.
explicitly a man in a horse costume, whereas Horse off course is no doubt a
Mm.
biological horse?
But is he though? Is MC Horse explicitly a man in a horse costume? Because in reality, obviously. However,
You mean in the
his eyes flare in the animations, which means that they are actually his eyeballs, and
yeah?
uh, breath comes out of his nostrils,
That's a
his horse
very
nostrils.
that's a very interesting point, because I think you're right that maybe in the universe of Everybody One Two Switch, MC Horus is
That's
a
him.
right, but I think that there is a counterpoint to this nonetheless. MC Horus has fingers. He does not have hooves. So,
So,
what I was going to suggest is
hmm,
that perhaps the most reasonable read of the situation is that MC Horse is some sort of hybrid mutant creature.
I would agree. So, also, there's the potential that Horse, of course, is his father.
Oh, so what you're saying is that there was nonetheless somewhere along the way bestiality because a human fucked MC Horus, or
Sure. What if,
sorry, a
like,
human. Wait, no,
hmm,
the human fucked Horse off course and then
yes,
gave birth
resulting in,
to
yes.
MC Horus.
Now, who's the hero?
I think it's probably Nikki Swapnote. Flower I used to play in.
Wait, like a sandbox size box? Or like a cardboard box? Or like a tub?
Like a big plastic tub full of flour.
How deep was it? Was it big enough for you to get in?
Yeah, yeah, it's just full of like baking flour. And I used to sit in my tub of flour, and I
Had
had,
your parents heard of sand before?
well, for whatever reason, I used flour, and I had these little plastic blue gemstones that I bury in the flour, and then I had little,
That
uh,
seems like the biggest draw for insects, other than if it was just straight sugar.
right. So then I had little like excavators and little, like equipment vehicles that I'd play with in my flower box to dig up the crystals.
Sure. Yeah. Did you build like fucking flower castles?
Well, I don't remember. I don't think I would have been able to because flour doesn't really,
No, it doesn't.
I do like distinctly remember my mom like cutting open a bag of King Arthur flour and to like dump
Yeah.
it in to help
Sure,
refill the.
to like regenerate it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now, was this inside or outside?
just inside the house.
Now, does your mother know that the properties of flour make it very difficult to keep tabs on and then subsequently clean up? Has she been made aware of this?
I'm not here to explain it. All I'm here to do is report that it happened.
You know what? I'm not shooting the messenger. I'm not shooting the messenger. What really I want to do is shoot your mother for fucking making this fucking decision.
This is 100% true. This is something that happened that I did.
Now, is this something that was this like something your parents did when they were kids? Or is this something that other kids in your like neighborhood did?
Oh no, I've never in my
I gotta
entire
look
life.
up flour kids playing in a box of flour. Toddlers cover house in flour. Why I don't have kids. Flour all over the floor. Was it? It was just plain flour.
It's white flour.
How deep was the flour? Would you say?
I mean, you gotta understand that I'm probably 3 at the time, so it could have been 2 inches deep of flour. It could have been 6 inches deep of flour.
Sure. You would have drowned in it either way.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah.